Welcome guys, your host Colin. Welcome back to the FIDE Online Arena. Got a really interesting game today against a partner from, looks like California. Some guy named Rodrigo. Anyway, he beat me twice. He defeated me twice with white pieces. And then it was in the third game that I wasn't gonna I wasn't gonna have it. So he gave me e4 with white pieces to start, and I lost. Sicilian defense, and then d4, and I lost, and now he went here with h4. Okay, so maybe getting a little overzealous here, but okay, my opponent's starting with the wings pawn opening. Okay, so sometimes we see this. Knight f6 and e3. Okay, so let's just go through the notation, guys. No virtual analysis, let's just look at the moves here. This is the third game of the day, and I promised myself that I wouldn't lose this game, and let's see, it turned out to be real interesting. So d5, and after d5, my opponent here from California played the move b3, going for this Larsen attack maybe, planting the bishop on the dark squared bishop on the long diagonal. Anyway, I played c5, bishop to b2, knight to c6, and bishop to e2 from my opponent, and now e5. Okay, so now I'm going for this center pawn wall here, guys, because I'm a little heated. I was a little upset that I was able to give away 2 games to my opponent who wasn't high rated at all, just surprising me with a lot of good moves, I guess, and just having a hard time defending these move orders from my opponent here, but who cares? Anyway, let's go d4. Now my opponent fighting for the center. He captures on d4. Let's play chess. Remember, he started this third game here, this second rematch with h4. So let's go. Let's play chess. As I said, e takes d4, and queen to e7 now. And after d captures on c5, queen captures on c5, knight f3 now. And white still looks better in this position, despite everything that I tried to come up with the 3 pawns in the center for black. So white looks better here. And bishop to f5 was what I played. And after knight to d4, knight captures is probably what he came up with in his mind. Bishop takes d4, queen captures on c2. Okay, so that c2 pawn was always weak, especially after queen to c5. So we see queen captures, bishop captures, and black is up a pawn. Okay, black is up a pawn in this position, but unfortunately my opponent gets to play, for me, bishop b5 check, and there's no way for me. Well, I guess the best move I should have played in this position was just knight to d7, and then after captures, and then I think I'm doing okay here. So I missed knight to d7. I didn't think that was an option for some reason. Instead, I just played king to d8, and now white is in control. White is clearly in control of this game despite being down a pawn. I lost castling rights, and now let's see what happens, guys. So bishop to f6. Remember, we said that knight to d7 was the best defense, and I missed that in the game. And after g captures on f6 and short castles from my opponent, now a6, asking a question of the light squared bishop. Light squared bishop drops back to e2, and king to d7. Knight to c3, what to do now? Okay, I'm going to fianchetto my dark squared bishop. I don't like my position at all here with black. I think it looks very weak. So my opponent captured the d5 pawn. Now my king is really unprotected out in the open. And so I played king to d6 in this position, and then knight to e3. Knight to e3, just attacking my black bishop on c2, the light squared bishop. So here, guys, I played the move. I tried rook h to e8, and I calculated, well, pretty simply, if my opponent just captures on c2, which he did, I could just always recapture e2 now with the rook up on the e file. And this is exactly what happened in the game. Now we saw rook a to d1 checking my black king here. That was not played. Instead, king to e5 was played. And now rook f to e1. Captures. It's a forced exchange in this line. And after king f4, actually, sorry guys, the move was king f5. So that's why we see another notation here. this is actually what happened in the game. So king to f5. Remember, this is the second rematch I had against this guy here online. So king to g6 and rook to d1. Okay, so let's count the material. 5 pawns for black, and white has a better pawn structure, right? I have double pawns on the f-file, which is bad for black. And I guess the only positive here for Team Black is that, I have a dark squared bishop, and who knows if this dark squared bishop's going to end up helping out a lot and proving to be better than the knight. Okay, so the best move in the position, according to the engine, was just knight to d5. But instead we saw from my opponent here, just playing knight to g4. And f5 wasn't mistaken in this position now, because this allows rook to d6, and I blundered here. Find a better move. Find a better move for black in this position. Find a better move for black. Is there a better move for black in this position? Well, right, of course it was better to play a rook move like rook to e8, for example. And now everything appears to be protected. If black goes for something like this, well, then you can just defend. And none of the pawns are really going down here. Everything seems to be okay. There's also a check here now. And after you force the king back, there's another check. And then this is coming. So yeah, maybe this would have been a better continuation, and I think black is equalizing. However, I missed all of that in the game. So instead I played the move f5, and now, as we mentioned, guys, the rook is coming up to d6, swinging up the board, and shifting my king over now, and this should just be an easy win now for white. But my opponent, I believe he thought that I was in a mating net and he miscalculated. But anyway, he played this move, rook captures on h6. And having played such great chess, my opponent here, this was the third game in a row, this, as we mentioned, the second rematch, and now giving me the g4 knight, and now the tides have turned in this position. Yes, the rook is going to capture on h7, as we see, and b5 is played by myself now, and okay, f7 is also hanging, but my opponent threw a check, f3 to the black king, king goes to g3, and now giving another check before capturing on f7, so king captures on h4, rook captures on f7 finally, and now king to g5, having to defend again, just still defending now with the king, and now my partner puts his king up the board to f2, and rook to c8 now for myself, looking for that c2 check square, also picking up a pawn. Okay, so then my opponent played g3 check, I backed my king up to e5, rook e7 check, and king f6, now attacking the rook. And white is still up a pawn in this position, and I like my position a lot better now than I did before, maybe believing that I could still defend here. Anyway, my opponent played rook to a7, and then I went for that move we just mentioned, rook to c2 check, checking the white king, king goes forward to e3, and now capturing the a2 pawn, as well as also defending my own a6 pawn, so that worked out well. Gaining a tempo and then also able to defend. Okay, so partner here from California played king to d4, and I played a5, rook a6, check to my black king. King moves up the board to g5, b4, and after b4 was played, I just pushed my pawn now to a4. And could you believe it, guys? I actually have a winning position now. Maybe this doesn't look winning on the surface right now, but we're going to go through the rest of this notation now, guys, brought to you by myself, Colin Heim with US Virgin Islands Chess. Yeah, your instructor, your host, your online operator. Let's look at this now and solve this puzzle and win for black. Incredible. You know, my opponent gave me a chance here and allowed me back in the game. Thought he had a mating net, and was sorely mistaken. So now, let's see, rook f2, obviously attacking this weakened f3 pawn. My opponent went ahead and captured the b5 pawn, and now rook captures on f3. King goes back to c6 now, making way for the b pawn to start walking up the board. But as we see, guys, I pushed my a pawn up to a3, and yes, now it's protected by my black rook right there, nestled on f3. So my opponent pushed his b pawn, and now capturing the g pawn, allowing the b pawn for my opponent to advance, and now it's a race, guys, to see who's going to queen first. So now I have an extra pawn in this rook and pawn endgame, and yes, it is a race. So now defending the pawn that wants to queen here on b6, and after b6, b7 was played by my opponent. Yes, guys, now f4, and the rook is going to have a hard time controlling everything. Right, guys, actually the best move in the position was actually, as the computer mentions, just rook captures here, right, or even just defending here. My opponent missed this. So yeah, and now if this happens, and now the rook is dropping, well, actually, black is queening first, right? So that's winning for black. We didn't see that in the game. Instead, we saw king to c7, and after rook to c3 check and king to d8, rook goes back to b3, king goes back to c7. It was in this position, guys, that I thought to myself, maybe I have to draw here, because that b pawn looks as though it's going to queen, and I don't want to lose 3 games in a row. Maybe I have to offer a draw or something. Claim a 3-fold repetition, whatever the case may be. Anyways, guys, I fought on, and I found the courage to play f3 in this position, guys, and my opponent queened, and that's a complete mistake. This loses the game on the spot for white. Yes, rook captures, king captures, and f2, just in time. There's no way to defend both pawns here. You can't even defend the f pawn. The only move that works now is just rook captures on a3, and you're getting a queen. And this is what we saw happen in the game. So rook a5 check, king goes to g4, that's correct. Rook a4 check, king h3, move 56 now of this match. Rook a3 check, king to g2, rook a2 check, and yes, now there is a safe square. There are no more checks for white in this position, and after rook a3 and queen to f8, my opponent moved his king and resigned. Okay, so that was the end of the game. Wow, 59 moves, king to b7, and that was it. So I was able to be redeemed for those 2 losses, but in all fairness, I probably should have lost this game as well. But I was able to strategize here at the end, guys. Let's get back to this rook and pawn endgame just for the instruction, just so that we understand, right, that this b pawn, you know, maybe you're afraid about losing the rook here in this position, but after king to c7, no, push f4, f3, and there's no way to defend both pawns after really the only good move in the position, right, which is just queens, right? Rook captures, king captures, and now you're queening first. And because the king defends the f6 square here, right? It's incredible. The king defends that defending square. You kind of just have to give up here. There's absolutely no good moves. It doesn't matter because the queen is coming for black now. And this was what was played. And thank you guys for watching. And yeah, I hope to see everyone in the future. And thanks a lot, guys. Take care for now, and bye-bye. See everyone on the other side. Queen f8 and king b7 were the last moves of the game. And sort of lucky, but at the same time, most appreciative win, as I was able to come back in the series against a bitter rivalry that I had online in the FIDE arena. Okay, guys, thanks. More to come in the future. See you guys later. Bye-bye.